She's live for us this morning with details. Emerald, what timeline did the president share when it comes to bringing troops home?
He moved it up. Remember, originally the Trump era timeline was May 1st. Then when the Biden administration decided to continue with the agreement, President Biden set the 9/11 timeline, which didn't sit well with a lot of people. He now announced yesterday that the full withdrawal will happen by August 31st. Now, the president saying that he's keeping with his predecessor's agreement, an agreement he inherited, but he was asked the same question that President Trump was asked when negotiating this agreement in Afghanistan. Can you trust the Taliban?
Do you trust the Taliban, sir?
Is that a serious question?
It's absolutely a serious question.
It's a silly question. Do I trust the Taliban? No. But I trust the capacity of the Afghan military, who is better trained, better equipped, and more competent in terms of conducting war.
But many members of Congress are not so confident as President Biden. In fact, Representative Pat Fallon, a member of the Armed Services Committee, talking to Spicer and Company last night, said that this is a premature withdrawal and he didn't think it was handled well. Also, Senator Lindsey Graham, who, let's be honest, is often advocating for troop presence in places overseas, also said that this is a preemptive move, suggesting that there's conditions developing on the ground in Afghanistan that will cause major upheaval. That's what he said on Twitter. But look, President Biden sounded very Trumpian in defense of leaving.
How many thousands more Americans' daughters and sons are you willing to risk? How long would you have them stay? Already we have members of our military whose parents fought in Afghanistan 20 years ago. Would you send their children and their grandchildren as well? Would you send your own son or daughter?
His press secretary earlier in the day also called it an unwinnable war. And if you'll recall, back in the 2020 election cycle, Biden suggested he was the guy who didn't want to go into Afghanistan. And he now paints this, less interventionist portrait of himself. But look, you have to remember that Biden actually did support the 2001 resolution in the Bush era to authorize military force against nation organizations or persons responsible for 9/11 that led to the engagement in Afghanistan. He also supported the Iraq War resolution in regards to weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah. And Emerald, as you point out, the president now coming out in defense of the troops, wanting to bring them home. We're going to continue this conversation with a few Congress members and political analysis as well. He did hold a press briefing, took some questions from reporters. The White House press secretary also held a briefing yesterday. And Emerald, you yourself kind of had an interesting online conversation with White House press secretary Jen Psaki. I want to show our viewers so we can bring them up to speed here. You wrote saying the major problem in White House press coverage right now, major conservative media outlets have been pushed to the back rows of press briefings, and then press secretary cuts short her briefings before calling on those media outlets. It's a strategy to avoid handling tough questions. Believe the press secretary responded as well. Of course, you noting that certain organizations, including this one, Newsmax, Daily Caller, Daily Mail, again, not being called on. She responded, Jen Psaki, saying, I guess if you don't count Fox News or Fox Radio or the Washington Examiner and a few more just today. Emerald, why did you feel it was so important to tweet out that message, and what did you make of her response?
Well, just in her response, she did not call on the Washington Examiner. I didn't think she did, and I confirmed that with their White House coverage team. So she did not call on them. She did call on Fox News and Fox Radio. But look, there's a lot of outlets in there that would ask tough but fair questions. Not just Newsmax, Daily Caller, Real Clear Politics, New York Post, and others. And she does this strategy now that we're full capacity. Remember when we were staggered and there was only a small group of people in there, she had to go to the whole room because it was too obvious. Now she takes lots of questions, sometimes 7 questions from one reporter in the front 3 rows. And then she barely makes it to the back rows where we have been relegated to now. And I have raised the issue with the White House Correspondents Association that there needs to be a reevaluation of that seating chart and perhaps even a rotation, making it more fair, in which it's a rotating room so that there's not always the same people in the same seats. Now, of course, she can still pick and choose who she wants to go to, but it makes it a little bit harder and a little more obvious. And I'll tell you, last week, she got to my row. It was the natural course of things was to call on me, and she immediately wrapped it up. So it's our job as the press to hold an administration accountable and have them defend their policies with fair but tough questions. And sometimes you just don't see that in that briefing room. And I felt like it was time to point it out before it goes on much longer.
And again, this is the administration that has pointed out that they are the most transparent administration. They claim to be and say that they are taking questions from everyone. And yet, as you point out, it's easier to end these briefings when you've got someone in the back row. Hopefully, we get this rotation going. Emerald, I'd love to see you closer to Jen Psaki, just so she doesn't miss your hand being raised. Emerald Robinson, live in D.C. Absolutely. Thanks, Emerald. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
One of the tough questions, in fact, many of them were on Afghanistan. For more on the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan by August 31st, we'll bring in Republican Congressman James Comer from Kentucky, joining us live on this Friday. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on. I'm sure you've seen the president's remarks. Yesterday, he said troops were sent over for a couple of reasons. One, to bring Osama bin Laden to justice. Two, to diminish al-Qaeda's ability to threaten the U.S. He says the job was completed, but this is what the press secretary of the White House said.
The president feels that the American people elected him to serve as commander-in-chief, make decisions that are in our national interest. It doesn't mean they're always easy, and it doesn't mean there aren't drawbacks to the decisions that he makes. But he is not going to ask another generation of kids to go and serve in Afghanistan in a war that he does not feel can be won militarily. And that is the core driver of his decision here.
And that last part, again, is what a lot of folks are honing in on. There's an argument, was it a success overseas in the nation's longest war? Was it not a success? There seems to be these different viewpoints on it. What are your thoughts, Congressman?
Well, there have certainly been successes and failures. As you mentioned, the initial goal was to bring Osama bin Laden to justice. If you look at the fact that since we began the war in Afghanistan, there hasn't been a terrorist attack on American soil. So that's definitely a win. But I didn't like what the press secretary said, especially considering Joe Biden was one of the earliest senators in support of going to war in Afghanistan when he was a senator from Delaware. So I don't think that was showing a lot of respect to the troops who have put forth so much in Afghanistan over the past 20 years. So many have given their lives and left Afghanistan with severe disabilities. I think we've accomplished a lot, but I'm one of the Republicans that's been very vocal about withdrawing troops from Afghanistan. That was part of my platform when I ran for Congress 5 years ago. But the difference we have today versus when Donald Trump announced that is we have a president that, quite frankly, is not viewed the same on the national stage as Donald Trump. Donald Trump was feared and respected on the national stage, and Joe Biden is not. And that creates a problem for what Afghanistan is going to look like once our troops have withdrawn.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because Biden says the Afghans can take care of themselves in that press conference, but that the U.S. is not walking away necessarily, that we will continue to support Afghanistan. Here's that soundbite.
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place. The question is, will they generate the kind of cohesion to do it? It's not a question of whether they have the capacity. They have the capacity. They have the forces. They have the equipment. The question is, will they do it? And I want to make clear what I made clear to Ghani, that we are not going to walk away and not sustain their ability to maintain that force. We are. We're going to also work to make sure we help them in terms of everything from food necessities and other things in the region.
And reporters pushed back. Reuters yesterday put this headline out. The Taliban is already saying it controls most of Afghanistan and it's reassuring Russia. This doesn't sound like what Biden had in mind. A lot of folks are concerned about this from a military perspective. And obviously, as you know, the crown jewel, if you will be Kabul and overtaking that city. Is the Afghan government in trouble?
I think anyone who studied history would doubt the president's wishful thinking for Afghanistan moving forward. The history of Afghanistan clearly shows that there are always going to be factions over there. And with the Taliban, we can't trust the Taliban. But the problem that we have, again, goes back to the fact that we have a weak president who is not feared by the Taliban or respected by the Afghan government. The fact that the Taliban is going to Russia and Russia looks like they're the leader in the area. I mean, it's just not a good look for the United States. I think that goal that we all have, and we all hope that everyone in Afghanistan will come together and live peacefully in a democracy for the next century, would be more realistic if we had a better diplomatic team in the Biden administration. So I have a lot of concerns about what Afghanistan is going to look like after the troop withdrawal. We've been trying to get out of Afghanistan for many years now. We're finally getting out of Afghanistan, but just pulling the troops isn't the best exit strategy. You have to have a plan moving forward, a diplomatic plan. And I haven't seen that from Joe Biden yet. And he really should have presented that in a clear and easily definable way prior to announcing that he was moving back the troop withdrawal date.
So many moving parts. I mean, bringing over some for visas, thousands of them over. Who are they that you're bringing over? Obviously, what happens if the Taliban does take over? There are so many different storylines to this that will continue to follow. Again, troop removal, August 31st. Congressman James Comer joining us live here on this Friday. Congressman, thank you. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.